Welcome. I am Andrea Hobley, President of the League of Women Voters of the Woodbury Cottage Grove area. It's my pleasure to welcome you to our program this evening. We will be hearing about the ballot questions for ISD833, which is South Washington County School District, and you may also hear us refer to as SWASHCO. For those of you unfamiliar with the League of Women Voters, we are a grassroots organization that has been in existence for over 100 years. We are a trusted source of nonpartisan voter education. Our program tonight is one of several educational programs that our local league hosts every year. The league's mission is to encourage informed and active participation of citizens in government, work to increase understanding of major public policy issues, and influence public policy through education and advocacy. And I'd also like to share a nonpartisan policy because this is really important to us. The League of Women Voters is nonpartisan, neither supporting nor opposing candidates or political parties at any level of government, but also always working on vital issues of concern to members of the public. And likewise, along that, we can't support or oppose candidates or parties. In this case, also, we can't oppose or support the ballot initiative. So our purpose in hosting the program is to support our community, to be informed and engaged citizens. And what we really want to encourage everyone to do is get out and vote either way. A few housekeeping items. One, we will have the Q&A open for questions. So if you have a question, go ahead and type it in there. Kind of depending on how it fits in, we may ask it at the time, we may ask it at the end. So just know if you submit a question and we haven't asked it yet, I'm holding on to those for the end. And then also we are recording this program. And it usually takes a couple days to get up on our YouTube page. So if you want to share this with other people or other groups later, or rewatch it, we'd be happy for you to do that. And then lastly, I also want to direct you to watch our candidate forums. We had a forum for school board in September. And they did ask the question about the ballot questions to the candidates. And that's available both on our website and the South Washington County Telecommunications Commission, SWCTC's YouTube page. Now I'd like to turn it over to Julie Nielsen, who's the superintendent for South Washington County School District, and Dan Pyan, who's the executive director of finance and operations for the district. Thank you.
Thank you, Andrea, and thank you to the League of Women Voters. As we shared as we were hopping on, we will share this information with anyone who wants to listen. So thank you for those of you who are joining us this evening. Dan and I actually just flew in from a city council meeting, but we are happy to go ahead and get started. So if you want to go ahead and pull up the slide deck. First of all, as we get started, for individuals viewing this evening to know that securing our future, supporting our students was really a response to our unsuccessful bond election in August of 2022. We took time to pause, to reflect, to make sure that we were listening to our community. As part of that, we did a community survey. We conducted a new demographic study. And so the results of what people will see on November 7th are really in response to a lot of listening, a lot of feedback from our community. We had a number of sessions where we went out, we asked for feedback, we got that feedback, we made adjustments. And so what you're going to see tonight are really the priorities of all the priorities. You're going to see things from last August that are completely taken off. And what remains are those things that our community said were of highest priority as we move forward. Next slide. And I will tend to just pause in between slides. So what's on the ballot November 7th? First of all, we'd like to take you from a high overview and then get more granular into specific questions. But when you look at South Washington County Schools and what's on the ballot November 7th, you're going to see two bond questions. Question one, as we keep it high level, the focus will be on safety and security enhancements, expansions and renovations at our secondary schools. And when we say secondary schools, we're talking about our middle and our high schools. To note, the most important thing brought forward as part of our listening were really areas of safety and security. Our community wanted to make sure that our schools were as safe and as secure as possible. And so that is why you see safety and security in question one. Question two addresses elementary school space at those schools that are projected to be over capacity, along with an additional set of restrooms at 5 of our 1960 schools that currently have 4 girls' stalls and 4 boys' stalls. And so as enrollment has gone up in those schools, we need additional restrooms. And question two is not new with the bathrooms. that was actually on the ballot in 2015 as well. So we have continued that ask. It has continuously been prioritized by our community. Please also note when we talk about question 2 and as we get into it, question 2 is contingent on question 1 passing, which means in order for question 2 to pass, it must get enough votes, but question 1 must also pass. And then finally, Dan will go into a little more detail as it relates to our capital projects levy, our technology levy, which will address infrastructure. Again, that's safety and security, but it's all related to technology. As you take a look at our projected enrollment in the bottom left-hand corner, you will see that we utilized Hazel Reinhardt Consulting Services. Hazel was the state's demographer many, many years ago, and she conducted a number of demographic studies, not only in South Washington County schools, but Stillwater and a number of other metro districts. And so if we look today at 2024, so where we're going to be at the end of this year, we are almost spot on with where Hazel said we were going to be at around 18,770 to 18,780 students. So very much our projections are holding true. From last October to this October, we're talking about approximately a 200 student increase. And so we continue to see that South Washington County Schools as a district, we are growing. So as we look at the cost, so as we look at this slide, we just want to start by breaking down the costs. If you remember in August of 2022, the ask from the school district was $463 million. As we look at question 1 that addresses safety and security and then our secondary schools, we're talking about $160 million ask. And then bond question 2, which gets at the elementary space as well as those additional restrooms, is $40 million or $200 million total with question 1 and question 2. This gives our residents and taxpayers, if you look down the left-hand column, please note that this is for question 1 and question 2. And so the impact of question 1 and question 2, question 1 being $5, question 2 being $1 on a median valued home in our district, and that median cost across Woodbury, Cottage Grove, St. Paul Park, and Newport, Afton, and Denmark townships is about $409,000 as that median cost, or $6 a month for question 1 and 2, or $75 a year.
As Julie mentioned, as we connected with community members, safety and security was the #1 thing. The technology projects levy will address safety and security relating to technology. What are we talking about? Well, we have cybersecurity is a big one. We have cybersecurity insurance. We know that a couple other districts have been compromised with their technology. We sit on a lot of data. We hold data on students. We hold data on employees. This question would ask voters to revoke and renew the current $2.8 million levy with an increase to $5 million. And if approved, this levy would have a tax impact of about $3 per month on a median valued home in the district. We have a tax impact calculator online in which any resident can go into on our website and go in and plug in their estimated market value, take it off their tax statement, and they can see the tax impact of question 1, question 2, and question 3.
So the next area gets into sometimes the confusion when we talk about levies are for learning, bonds are for building. And while people may take a look at South Washington County Schools and know that as part of the state's funding, we receive 4% and 2%. A better way to look at question 1 and question 2 is really about an individual who was at one of our sessions says, it's like mortgaging your home. And that's exactly what school districts do. It's the only method to raise enough funds for new construction and extensive remodeling or expansions. And so we say bonds are for building. These dollars do not take away from operating costs. You're just fine with the clicker. The next one just gets a look at ballot question 1 and ballot question 2. We want to make sure when voters go to the polls that they have the opportunity to read the language. And it does not go into detail in terms of what the priorities were, but it does talk about the overall amounts. We do like to point out for question 1 and question 2 that by voting yes on the ballot, you are voting for a property tax increase. And as I shared earlier, question 1 on that median valued home is $5, and question 2 is $1 on that $409,000 median valued home. So as we look at question 1, consistently, as we went back and forth 3 times with our community and staff back to our advisory team, community and staff back to our advisory team, these items consistently remained at the top. And those items include the construction of new secured entryways at Park and Woodbury High School, along with 3 of our middle schools, Cottage Grove, Lake, and Woodbury Middle School. When we talk about secured entryways and security, what we're really talking about are the schools where currently individual visitors or guests get buzzed in and they actually enter the office. At the 5 schools that are listed there for $25 million, when visitors or guests get buzzed in, they're actually buzzed into what we call the learning space. They're out in a hallway and they have access to all of our classrooms. And what this $25 million would do, it would allow an individual to be in the vestibule. And once they got buzzed in, they would actually enter the office. And the reason that's important is because many times we have guests and visitors who need to talk with the principal. They're there for an IEP meeting. They need to drop something in the office. And with these new secured entryways, then we would not have guests and visitors out in our learning spaces if they did not need to be out there. And then finally, the second part of question 1 is the planned addition at Eastridge High School. Not everyone is aware that when Eastridge High School was built, there was a space with the footings for the planned addition. Along with the planned addition, there would be extensive renovations at Park and Woodbury High School. And that combination for high schools would be $105 million. And then finally, like Eastridge, when we built Oltman only passed with 5 votes. When we built Oltman, we built it for 900 students, and it is currently at capacity. And so we are asking for additional dollars to do the planned addition at Oltman, along with renovations at Woodbury Middle School, including the filling in of the pool that currently has been empty for a couple of years so that it turns into usable space for students and staff. And so there you have the breakdown of what was prioritized across our system and by our community and staff as the highest priority in the district, $5 a month on a median home value. If bond question 1 fails, the secured entryways would not be added to those schools where they were requested. The overcrowding would continue. We've heard from a number of individuals about changing high school attendance boundaries. And I think for anyone who is viewing now or has listened to our presentations or been part of South Washington County Schools, you know how emotional attendance boundaries are, in particular at the high school level. So if question 1 fails, we will actually need a year to talk about what options do we have. Of course, we have options with online school. We have options with grade reconfiguration. What that might look like is 6th grade would go to elementary, 9th grade would go to the middle school, and then our high schools, because they're overcrowded, would only include 10th, 11th, and 12th graders. But it's important to note that at this time, we would solve nothing by changing high school attendance boundaries because they are all overcrowded or close to capacity. So there would be no high school attendance boundaries. Remember earlier, I talked about the word contingent. If bond question 1 fails, it means that bond question 2 also fails. And as a result of bond question 2 failing, we would be talking about elementary attendance boundary changes for this coming fall, 24-25, as well as some slight middle school boundary adjustments to keep those elementary kids as they travel to the next school together. And as we look at the specifics of question 2, when we think about elementary school additions, we're talking about the 4 elementary schools that are currently at or close to overcapacity. In Woodbury, that includes Red Rock and Bailey. In Cottage Grove, that includes Pine Hill and Gray Cloud. So those 4 elementary schools would receive the additions for approximately $31 million. And then, as I already talked about, those 1960 schools with the bathrooms, another set of bathrooms would be added at Crestview, Hillside, Pine Hill, Pullman, and Royal Oaks. And that additional cost would be $9 million, making our second question $40 million or $1 on that median home value. And if bond question 2 fails, I talked about this as a result of 1, Instead of constructing the additions at those elementary schools, we are prepared to change elementary school attendance boundaries beginning with the 2024-25 school year. And I believe later in the presentation, you will actually see the calculator that parents can go in those overcrowded schools, put their address, and see if they are impacted by attendance boundary changes. But those, in anticipation, those boundary changes have already been made and are in the process of being adjusted. In addition, we would, as I shared, we would have slight middle school attendance boundary changes, and then those additional set of restrooms at Crestview, Hillside, Pine Hill, Pullman, and Royal Oaks would not be added if question 2 fails. This just gives you a high-level look when we're talking about attendance boundary changes at the elementary schools. This just gives you a high-level look of where we would be moving students from and to. It's important to note on that left-hand side, as we talked about those schools that were significantly overcrowded. If you look at Bailey is losing 75, 85, almost 100 students. You see that Bailey has students going to 4 different schools. Gray Cloud is losing about 122, if I did my 120 also, if I did my math quickly. Pine Hill is about 60, and Red Rock is 68. And so we know that those schools that are overcrowded, we have to make some shifts of students out. And this is just the boundary tool that I explained. So families who are wondering, is this going to impact my elementary child? They can actually put their address in, and it will actually share out with them their elementary, their middle, and their high school as a result of question 2 being unsuccessful.
Can I jump in and ask a question on that? So I know
Absolutely.
sometimes when boundary changes happen that students who are already at a school are sort of grandfathered into the school where they're at. Would this impact students that are currently at a school needing to move?
Yes.
Or only incoming students? Okay.
No, this would be, because at some point we just have to redraw the boundaries. The grandfathering, I think, while we understand it for consistency for students, it's just really difficult to track. And then what we end up is that we have a family that has a 5th grader, a 3rd grader, a 2nd grader, and a kindergartner. And now it may mean we're busing kids one direction. And so we really have communicated, and I think it's a great question, that these attendance boundaries would be anybody impacted with their address. They would all shift for 24-25.
Thanks.
And finally, we'll talk once again about question 3, the technology project levy. This is a capital projects levy. It's a way for districts to levy for technology. It will be used for all of our technology costs, including cybersecurity, improved instructional technology, support staffing, maintenance, and support for student and staff devices, and enhance technology infrastructure. When we talk about infrastructure, we're talking about our systems. We have many systems in place. We have a system in human resources, in finance, and student information, in transportation, in school nutrition, and they don't always talk to each other. Once we get this dedicated source of revenue, we can work on making everything more consistent. Once again, we have a sample ballot of the capital project levy question. And as we said before, by voting yes on this question, you're voting for a property tax increase. So as we look at this method of funding technology, about 100 school districts in the state utilize this form of funding, but they don't all levy the same, as you can see by this chart. Right now, we levy about $137 per student for technology. If this passes, that will go up to about $250 per student. Of all the districts that levy for technology, the average is about $493 per student. So we'll still be a little bit more than half of the average. We knew what the tax impact would be. We tried to keep things as tight as we could, but we're anxious to have a dedicated source of technology revenue. And finally, as people are looking to vote and want more information, please visit our site, so washco.org/facility planning. It's got all the information you want. It's got a place for people to ask questions. It's got the tax impact calculator. It's got the boundary calculator. It's got explanations of all the projects. It's got the cost of the projects in it. most anything anyone needs. And if they do have further questions, they can submit them online through the website.
And I would just close by saying that everyone who's a resident in South Washington County Schools this week or later last week should have received a mailing from the school district. This is not from the county. This is from the school district with polling locations. And when you open it up, it has the ballot language, so that one thing that the school district was criticized on not having a local paper is, where was the communication out to our residents? And so for those people who are familiar with South Washington County Schools, of the residents of South Washington County Schools, 30% have children in the district, 70% do not. And so along with the mailing last week, after MEA this week, so sometime next week, you'll also be getting the second quarterly mailing for this year. It will have really fun stories about what's happening in South Washington County Schools, but in the center, it will have a big election layout. So again, our job is to make sure that everyone in the school district has the information. So we have information on the website, but we've also invested in those mailings so that people get the information. And as Andrea said, they can go to the polls and make an informed decision. So with that, Andrea, that concludes our presentation, and we are open to any questions.
Wonderful. Well, I have some questions that I've kind of pulled from talking to people, and some of the common questions I see asked in the community. We don't have any questions in our Q&A right now, but I'd like to encourage our attendees, if they have questions. We want to make sure that we, kind of hear from, what are kind of the common concerns of people, or, in either way. So one thing I wanted to ask about that I had seen a few people mentioning was, as far as the estimated cost, I know you have the $6 per month and the $70 per year for median homes. Is that the cost for the first year? And if it's going to go up, how much is it expected to increase? Is it with inflation, or are there other increases?
Yes, that's for the first year, and that's because that's all you can really calculate based on the information you know. But we'll say that our financial advisors had put in a very conservative number for market growth. Market growth will always lower taxes because you're spreading the same amount of money over more homes. So unless we have a terrible crash in the home market, I do not see it going up. It can only really go down.
That actually leads into one of the other questions that I had, which was, I think, it kind of gets into how things are funded, but I think a lot of people think, oh, we've had all this new building, so shouldn't the new building, all the new, especially, in Woodbury and Cottage Grove, well, and it really across all of our cities, does that, could that have supported it instead of having to go back for another bond? Or if you wanted to explain like how that worked, I think that's a question a lot of people had is, was it something that wasn't planned for very well with the city planning or the builders, or is it unrelated to that?
Well, as far as property taxes go, it's a very complicated thing, but in some ways it's a very easy thing. School districts ask for a levy amount, a set amount. And the county will divide up what everybody's property values are and tax people based getting to that total amount. Our amount that we're asking for in a bond is not going to change. It is what it is. We're going to borrow $200 million. If there's more homes paying that bill, everybody else's bill will go down. I know it's a common perception that, well, you get $3,000 to save, and on my tax bill goes to school taxes. So every time there's a new house, that's $3,000 more. It doesn't work that way. It works as a spread. And that's the only really way I could really explain that. As far as planning goes, we do keep track of what's coming in for new developments. You can't really count the development until the developer actually decides to start doing something with the land. But we know what's zone this and what's zone that. But we're still kind of at the mercy of where they build. Mm-hmm. And we can't move our schools around, so we just have to make the best of what we have. And sometimes it's a matter of, well, we need to make this school bigger, or we actually need a new school over here. But those things are always going to come after the fact, because all homes are based on market, whether they can sell them or not. So they may make these plans, but you never know until the market develops and they sell the land.
And as Dan always says, our projections are always wrong. Because they're never going to be spot on. And as Dan talked too, we work very closely with the city of Woodbury and the city of Cottage Grove in terms of home starts. I think after the last bond, we heard like, why isn't the city paying for these schools? And that is not the funding mechanism of how public schools can build buildings. It's just different than our cities. And so we heard some of that as well. But I think for our community to know that we work as closely with our cities in terms of projections and home starts and neighborhoods and what type of home, so that we can make sure that we're always looking forward with our projections on student enrollment.
I'm going to ask this just because I saw it as a question, and I know you just kind of alluded to this, but you know, if past projections haven't been accurate, how can we have confidence in current projections? And it sounds like you're doing, you know, projections are always, you know, a bit of a crystal ball, I'm sure. So we wish we had a crystal ball, but
And
I don't know how you would address those concerns.
I think the thing about a projection is that we don't know if they were inaccurate before. They were a projection based on the home builds. What we are more certain about now is that when we had the new demographic study, is we only did it for 5 years. And so 5 years is important because we now know the number of births in Washington County. And so we also know what's called our capture rate of the births that occur in Washington County. And that capture rate gives us the number of anticipated projected kindergarten students that we would have 5 years after they're born. And so that is why, you know, this year, and we were told by Hazel that we would have one of our smaller kindergarten classes, and it was spot on. And so definitely there's more confidence when the kids are already born than when we're trying to look out 10 years. I think the balance of that is while we have a 5-year plan, it's important to note that the work of construction may take 3 to 5 years. And so while we say this is a 5-year plan, the work that we're asking for now will be staged in 3-year increments. And so it still means that, you know, the additions aren't going to happen next week or even next year. It's going to take some time in already overcrowded schools.
Thank you. A question that came up, I know we have one other question. I'm not trying to skip you whoever asked that, but I want to go to the second question we have because I had it up next on mine as well. But we've seen, we know that the state had that $17 billion surplus. And question is, you know, why isn't that money being used to fund some of the schools? I also understand the difference you're explaining between bonding versus the levy, for example, that a bond is like taking out a mortgage on something we're building. But maybe even especially toward the levy question, or maybe how it impacts both questions.
Well, the way the state does their budget, I guess, is really a question for the state legislators. I mean, I've been following it for 25, 30 years, and we know that, you know, of their budget, about 40% goes to K-12 education. Most of that money is for day-to-day, well, basically all the money is for day-to-day operations. I mean, there is most of the property being built, repairs to our buildings, things like that, comes from levies from the local taxpayers. And that's just the system they have in place. So there was no talk ever of the surplus of using it to help build schools. And they have what's called a state bonding bill, but those are for all other public entities except for us. It's just the way it is. So I can't speak for why they do it that way, but I just know that's the way they do it.
All right. Other question we had in the Q&A was, you know, bonds are for buildings. Will there be an increased cost from an operational standpoint, and is there an estimate for that? Is that built into the estimates that were already presented, or is that a separate accounting?
Yeah, that's a separate one because those are operational costs. We do have to estimate those operational costs for the Minnesota Department of Education in the review and comment document. So those are in there, what we think the operational costs will be. As we see an increase in enrollment, we see an increase in funding. So the idea is that the increase in funding of the students will cover that operational cost. And the other key factor is we're not adding a new building, meaning we don't need to add new administration. It's really just adding teachers to teach the kids that are coming in, the new kids coming in.
I think, Andrew, when we look at the operational side of our budget, it's important, and many times when we show the operational side, we show it in a dollar bill. We show how many cents are invested, and the large portion of what we get from the state, and this year it was 4% and 2%, 4% this year, 2% next year. We have to realize that we negotiate with 11 different bargaining units. And when you think about what negotiations are looking like, anything more than 4%, we're already deficit spending. And so we just need to be thoughtful about that. But our operational costs, the largest investment are in the people that exist within our system.
Oh, we just got another question. I have a couple questions left and then a Q&A. How did 833, so I mean, just to center us on what this question is, as many people know, like in Woodbury especially, we're split between districts 833 and 834, 834 being the Stillwater School District. Question is, how does so much of the funding from businesses in Woodbury end up going to 834 versus 833? And was that anything that we had any control over?
No, school district boundaries are determined by the state legislature, and they were determined a long time ago. There's no reason for any school district to say, go ahead, South Wash, take our land, because they know that anything that happens on their land will increase their tax base and lower their residential taxes. It should be pointed out too that part of our Woodbury also belongs to a 622, the North St. Paul School District. But we really, unless we can convince those districts to say, yeah, you can move the line, we'd be happy to, but it doesn't happen. And most of the big time commercial builds this year were up near I-94, and they all belong to Stillwater, the Amazon building and all those buildings up there, the Stillwater School District. So it's just the way it is. And a wise man told us once, as he looked at the history of school districts, that the people that determine the school district boundaries are farmers, because that's all it was farmland back then. And they said, do you want to go to Stillwater or you want to go to Woodbury? And they made their decision. That's why the lines aren't always the straightest in the world.
Out of curiosity, is that something that the district gets involved? Like, does anyone from the district talk to anybody with the city about city planning as far as, I know you don't have control over where businesses decide to build, but I know the cities do a lot of that comprehensive long-term planning about where to put in businesses versus residential and all of that. Is that something that the district gets involved in at all, or not?
I would say that we certainly are at the table getting updates. And matter of fact, we just had a meeting this morning with the city of Woodbury, kind of going through the plan. But it's really not our role to make decisions about where businesses are located and to have all that expertise. But we certainly sit at the table and have conversations. Like when Amazon, we were just hoping Amazon would have landed in South Washington County schools, and it didn't. But really, we talk about that whole northern part of Tamarack Village that is not in South Washington County schools. And I don't know who put the question out there, but we get asked that often, like, why don't you just take those? And why are the boundaries that way? I don't think there's any school district would give up the land and the kids that are part of their school district. So, Dan, anything you'd add?
No.
Okay.
Yeah, it's a good question. I think that how that works is very interesting and hard to control for. So one of the questions, I know you covered pretty well what happens if the bonds don't pass, but one thing I was wondering about is what happens if the technology levy doesn't pass? Is that something where if it doesn't pass, we need to spend some of that money one way or another? And if that's going to come from other sources like our operational funding, or is that something where some of it just won't get spent? And then what are the consequences of that?
Well, you answered your own. Yeah, you're exactly right. It will come out of operational dollars. as some of it does now, we're probably paying for technology through like 4 different buckets of funds that are either reserved or not reserved. And by not having that, it does put a strain on like our capital budget, and that can be used for textbooks and building repairs and vehicles and stuff, and that takes away from that kind of stuff. And then we also have some part that we use unassigned dollars for, and those are our general fund dollars in our checking account that we're trying to get to a certain goal in our reserve, and that takes away from that. So we'll still do the things we need to do, but it doesn't give us a dedicated source, and it takes away from other programs.
Thank you. You know, the last question I feel like that I still kind of want to ask, but I'm not sure that it's really, I feel like it's coming from a place of maybe not understanding the purpose of the bonds and the levy, but I want to ask it anyway, because I'm sure there are people who are thinking about it. You know, what is there, we have evidence that the money that would be spent would improve learning. I know this goes mostly to school capacity, like the number of bathrooms and things like that. But I guess just as a big picture question, I think people who might not be as informed about, you know, school finance might want to know, you know, what evidence do we have that this is important for, you know, our improving the education of our students?
Well, I think, first of all of our students deserve a spot to sit down in a class. They deserve to go into a cafeteria where they aren't waiting 20 minutes to get their lunch. And as they're waiting to check out, their chicken nuggets or their pizza's already gone because it's taken so long. And so when we go out into our schools, you know, and I think about the overcrowding, it really comes down to a regulation. And we think about, if we were all day long in the hallways in packed groups, what would that do then for our classroom learning? And, you know, Andrea, you're right. The physical structure of brick and walls, you know, in terms of academics, I don't know. But the reality is we need to make sure we have space for kids to actually sit in the classroom, to be in the hallways, to move around, and to have adequate space to utilize a restroom. And right now, our hallways are so crowded. Our core facilities, I'll talk core facilities, our cafeterias, our bathrooms, our gym spaces, everything is just being pushed to the max as our enrollment goes up. And so while maybe not directly connected to student achievement, it's certainly something that needs to be in place so that we can actually have kids in classrooms where there aren't students drizzling into the hallway or out in the hallway having to work, and there's dedicated spaces where kids can focus and learn and think. So I think that the bond is definitely a step toward that. And I think equally as important then are the academics, as you talk about that, and we certainly have heard that. But I think the academic portion really comes back to all of the adults that South Washington County Schools employ. The adults who interact with our students are the difference makers when it comes to student achievement.
Can I ask this with that question as far as the levy then goes for technology? I mean, it does sound like if the levy doesn't pass, some of that money is going to have to come out of operational spending, which does go to staffing, basically. So I guess as far as the technology question, there's sort of the direct answer, you know, how does that, you know, improve our learning? But then also, I suppose the counter side of that is that it might mean I don't know if it would mean staffing cuts or not, but that would also clearly affect learning. But I guess I'm wondering how you would answer that question as far as the technology levy goes, as whether you know, evidence that it would improve our educational learning or standards.
Well, I think when we talk about the educational piece of our technology, what we heard loud and clear was around safety and security. And so one of those things, when Rochester Public Schools was being held ransom, when Minneapolis had a cyber attack, is we hold on to a lot of student data, confidential student data. We hold on to a lot of confidential staff information, along with social security numbers, beneficiaries, you name it. And so we need to make sure that we protect that information. And so when we're talking about safety and security and technology, I mean, certainly there's a component of the device, and that can work on engagement and student achievement. But when we're talking about cybersecurity, those are fundamental things in terms of protecting highly confidential information that we don't want to be at risk with, because we know that when we open that, if we ever were held in an attack like Rochester, it costs a lot of money. And that's where Rochester got caught last year. And so, I definitely think that our use of technology in our classrooms looks different than it did during the pandemic. There may be some people that believe that kids are on devices all day long. And I can tell you at the elementary level, we have a new literacy curriculum, and students are engaged with books. And that is much more appropriate at the elementary level. Not to say they don't have devices or access. I think that there definitely is a time and place, but we also want to make sure that kids have a relationship, not just with their teachers, but they can have conversations with the other kids in their classrooms. And you can't have that kind of conversation and problem solve if you're on a device. And so as we think about literacy in our school district, those are the conversations we're having about students actually speaking to each other and not just on a device. Dan, anything you'd add about technology? No, okay.
Great. We had one other question in the Q&A, and then I think this will wrap us up. The question was, how well funded is our reserve fund?
At our last audited numbers from last year, we were at about 10 to 11% of our operating expenditures. Our goal is to get to 16%, which would be 2 months of operations. 8% would be 1 month. So you don't want to have too much, but you want to have at least 2 months around in case something happens. Mm-hmm. And any household probably looks at it that same way. I think after this audit, we'll creep up another couple percent and we'll be up to around 12 or 13. So we're sitting better than we have in the last 10 years. And we're still working on getting that up to our goal. And that goal is to get to 16% by 2027. But we're well funded right now. We've made some big moves. We cut about $10 million out of the budget back in 2021. And without doing that and the way things are funded, we'd probably be in a lot worse shape.
And is that affected at all by the questions? I know that it's kind of a separate pool of money, but. Mm-hmm.
Well, question 3 of the technology project levy, having the ability to have it all levied instead of taking from the general fund, that would increase our fund balance.
Right, I'm pulling on information from past years when our general fund is more well funded. Are we have better access to like lower interest rates and things like that?
Yeah, that's one of the questions during our bond ratings calls is how are you doing operationally? How do your numbers look? We're actually excited if this passes and we sit down with the bond raters and tell them how we've been doing the last couple of years. And I think they'll react favorably.
And I think, when we talk about the bond and the bond rating, that's not easy. When I started as superintendent 4 years ago, we were sitting at 2 or 3%. We made $10 million worth of adjustments. They were painful. And not only were they painful, but it's something that we continue to monitor every single year, because it's real easy to use a dollar amount and pay for 5 or 6 different people. And so I think one thing that in trying to keep the finances stable is really having to say no a lot. And that is part of the operational side, is that you always are looking and always prioritizing. But I'm extremely proud with Dan's conservativeness and with our really having to prioritize what we bring into the system and still adding and doing great things for kids, that we now are looking at a fund balance that is more than just a couple of days. When you're sitting at 1% and 2%, it is not positive for anyone. So I'm very pleased that we're sitting up in the 12 and 13%.
Yeah, and having a better rating helps us save money over the long run, having a better interest rate and all of that as well, I believe, right? Yeah.
Correct.
Well, I don't have any other questions. We've made it through everything, but I wanted to give you guys, if you had any kind of closing thoughts or anything that came up for you, in the set of questions that you feel like would help to wrap it up. Otherwise, I'll go ahead and do our kind of closing out and all that.
Yeah. I think I would just close up by saying thank you for participants who are on here. Thank you for engaging with us. We will have one more in-person session on November 1st, and that will be advertised in your community mailing that will come out next week. And so what we ask is please invite your neighbors in. Talk with your neighbors, talk with friends, talk with family members about it. We don't want it to be like last August when people said we didn't know anything about this, but it takes all of us. And so throughout this whole year, we've talked about be engaged with us, talk with us, connect with us. We want to hear what people have to say. We are hopeful that people will be informed and get to the polls, as you said. So thank you so much to the League of Women Voters again for your time and for this opportunity.
Great. Thank you again to Julie Nielsen and Dan Pyan for the great information and answering all of our questions tonight. And also thank you to our viewers for attending the program. I want to reiterate what I said at the beginning, that if you want to share this with others, we'd really encourage you to do that. Will be available on the League of Women Voters Woodbury Cottage Grove area YouTube channel. Probably the easiest way to get there is from just our website. I'm going to share this. I'm going to put this up. I am not really good with PowerPoint, so I'm going to share it. It's not in presenter mode, but I'm going to put this up while I'm closing us out so you can see these websites. I want to mention, if you go to our blog, that's probably the quickest way to get to the videos. Like I said, it'll take a couple days, a day or two to get this video up. The other thing that's the top post of our blog right now is the candidate forums for the South Washington County School Board candidates. That was in September. So we'd also really encourage, if this is something you're interested in, there's a question for each of the candidates on the ballot issues as well. And then the other thing that we also have the St. Paul Park City Council candidate forms there as well. Then the other one I want to point out is the Vote 411. That is a League of Women Voters resource that it's really maintained by the State League. So if you go to the State League website here, the lvwmn.org, their homepage has a ton of information about finding your polling place, seeing what's on your ballot, voting in person versus voting by mail. Their homepage just has a wealth of information for just getting you, to the right spot and knowing what to do. And then it'll also link you to that Vote 411 website, which has information about candidates. You can put in your address and it'll tell you what you're voting on. And if candidates have shared information, you can pull up the information there as well. So I just really encourage people to check out those resources. Other kind of closing things moving on, I'll leave this up in case anyone's looking for it, but I also wanted to let people know to save the date for February 10th. I know that feels far away, but it's going to come up fast. That is our annual legislative interviews. Again, that's February 10th. That is a Saturday, and it'll be on the morning on Zoom, and that's where we'll have Q&A with all of our local representatives before the legislative session starts. And then a couple of member programs coming up. We're going to have a primer on league positions on the Electoral College sometime in November, and that's going to be a member only meeting. And then we have our annual holiday brunch and legislative preview. That'll be December 2nd. You can find information about that, through the league newsletter and just watch your emails. So thank you again for joining us this evening, and good night.